My husband's mistress showed up at our anniversary dinner wearing the diamond bracelet meant for me. "Surprise, darling," she smirked, expecting me to break down. Instead, I calmly pulled out a USB drive. "The prenup has an infidelity clause," I said, "and my investigator has proof." His face went pale as waiters became witnesses. Before we continue, I would like to ask you to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and leave a comment about where you are watching from. Let's go back to where it all began. I never imagined my 20th wedding anniversary would become the day my carefully constructed life shattered into a million glittering pieces. Yet there I was, standing in the grand ballroom of the Westlake Hotel, champagne flute in hand, watching as my world collapsed around me. The evening had begun perfectly. Harvey had spared no expense, transforming the hotel's ballroom into a recreation of our honeymoon in Venice. Gondola props, twinkling lights reflecting off mirrored surfaces like water, and even musicians playing the same melody that had accompanied our first dance as husband and wife. Everything gleamed with the promise of celebration, of endurance, of love that had supposedly withstood the test of time. "To 20 remarkable years," Harvey had announced, raising his glass as our friends and business associates applauded. His eyes met mine across the room, and I'd felt that familiar flutter, the one I'd experienced since we were ambitious 20-somethings with nothing but dreams and determination. God, I was so blind. I'd spent the entire day in a state of anticipation. Harvey had hinted at a special gift for weeks, something he claimed would take my breath away. I'd caught him whispering on the phone, abruptly ending calls when I entered his office at Reynolds Enterprises, the company we'd built together, from nothing. I'd assumed it was all part of the surprise. The evening progressed with toasts and reminiscences. I'd just finished chatting with our old friends from business school when I noticed her enter, Peyton Davis, our new marketing director. She was 15 years younger than me, with the kind of confidence that comes from never having faced failure. Harvey had insisted on hiring her 6 months ago, despite my reservations about her limited experience. Now I understood why. It wasn't her presence that froze the blood in my veins. It was what adorned her wrist, a diamond tennis bracelet that caught the light with every movement, 3 carats of flawless diamonds set in platinum. I knew because I'd pointed that exact bracelet out to Harvey 3 months ago during a weekend in New York. "For our anniversary," I'd whispered, squeezing his arm as we passed Tiffany's. He'd smiled and made a note in his phone. Time seemed to slow as Peyton approached us, her laughter carrying across the room. She embraced Harvey with the familiarity of someone who'd done it countless times before. "Happy anniversary, you two." "Lovebirds," she exclaimed, but her eyes held something else when they met mine. Pity, perhaps, or worse, triumph. "That's a stunning bracelet," I managed to say, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. "It looks exactly like one I admired in New York recently." Harvey's face paled slightly, but he recovered quickly. Too quickly. "Great minds think alike," he chuckled, placing his hand on the small of Peyton's back with unconscious intimacy. "I thought it would be perfect for the Blackwell campaign photo shoot. Actually," Peyton interjected, twisting her wrist so the diamonds caught the light. "It was a thank you gift for all my hard work on the Richardson account. Harvey's so generous with his appreciation." The emphasis on that last word told me everything. The way her fingers lingered on his arm for a beat too long confirmed it. And Harvey's averted gaze, the slight flush creeping up his neck. These were tells I'd learned to recognize over 20 years of marriage, signals that appeared during board meetings when he was hiding something from investors. I'd spent 20 years building a life with this man. 20 years of supporting his ambitions, often at the expense of my own. 20 years of believing we were partners in everything. And there, amid crystal champagne flutes and congratulatory smiles, I realized it had all been a masterfully constructed lie. Yet something strange happened as I stood there, watching them exchange glances they thought were secret. Instead of crumbling, I felt a cold clarity washing over me. The shock didn't paralyze me. It awakened something I'd buried long ago. The fierce, ambitious woman who'd helped build a tech empire from scratch, who'd negotiated million-dollar deals before she was 30, who'd refused to be underestimated. "Would you excuse me?" I said, smiling with a calmness that surprised even me. "I need to check on the dessert arrangements." I walked away with my head high, each step purposeful across the marble floor. In the quiet of the ladies' room, I stared at my reflection. The custom Valentino dress, the elegant updo, the carefully applied makeup concealing the fine lines that Peyton didn't yet have. I looked every inch the successful businessman's wife, the perfect corporate partner, the woman who'd been gradually erased. My phone buzzed with a text from Harvey. "Where are you? Time to cut the cake." That's when I made my decision. I wouldn't cause a scene. Not tonight. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me break down. Harvey had always underestimated me, dismissed my business intuition as good luck rather than skill. He'd forgotten who I was before I became Mrs. Reynolds. Straightened my shoulders, reapplied my lipstick, and smiled at my reflection. "Happy anniversary to me," I whispered. For the rest of the evening, I played my role perfectly. I cut the cake, laughed at the right moments, and thanked everyone for celebrating with us. But inside, I was already planning. This wasn't just about a bracelet or an affair. This was about reclaiming everything that was rightfully mine. As we returned home that night, Harvey loosened his tie and poured himself a scotch. "Wasn't that wonderful?" he mused, seemingly oblivious to the transformation that had occurred in me. "Everyone said we're still the perfect couple." I smiled and kissed his cheek, tasting the lingering scent of Peyton's perfume. "It was truly revealing," I replied. And as he drifted off to sleep beside me, I opened my laptop and began making arrangements. The bracelet wasn't just a betrayal, it was the key that unlocked my cage, and I was about to fly free. The morning after our anniversary celebration, I woke before Harvey. Dawn was just breaking, casting long shadows across our bedroom, the master suite of the penthouse we'd purchased when Reynolds Enterprises hit its first billion in valuation. I watched him sleep. This man I'd built a life with, and felt nothing but cold determination. "You've got that board meeting at 9, I reminded him as he finally stirred, my voice perfectly normal. I'd already been up for hours, making calls that couldn't be traced and finalizing arrangements that had been months in the making. Harvey had no idea that I'd suspected something was wrong long before Peyton's bracelet confirmed it. "What would I do without you keeping my schedule?" Harvey mumbled, kissing my forehead absently before heading to the shower. He had no idea how soon he'd find out. The thing about being underestimated is that it gives you the perfect cover. For the past 6 months, as my suspicions grew, I'd been quietly gathering evidence. It started with odd charges on our corporate expense accounts, weekends at exclusive resorts when Harvey claimed to be at industry conferences, jewelry purchases that never found their way to my collection, late-night Uber receipts to addresses I didn't recognize. I'm not just the pretty face that stands beside the CEO at company functions. Before I met Harvey, I was on track to become the youngest partner at Boston's top consulting firm. I know how to follow a paper trail. I know how to build a case. "I might be late tonight," Harvey announced over breakfast, not meeting my eyes. "The Westbrook merger is hitting some snags." "No problem," I replied, sliding his favorite smoothie across the counter. "I've got that charity event anyway, the one for children's literacy." He nodded distractedly, clearly not remembering anything about it. There was no charity event. There was, however, a meeting with Patricia Winters, the best divorce attorney in the state, followed by a visit to our bank's security deposit box, the one Harvey didn't know about. As soon as his town car pulled away, I went to my home office and unlocked the hidden compartment in my antique desk. Inside was a small black USB drive containing everything I needed. Screenshots of text exchanges between Harvey and not just Peyton, but 2 other women before her. Financial records showing how he'd been systematically diverting company funds for personal use. Recordings of him taking credit for my business ideas during investor calls when he thought I wasn't listening. Not quite the anniversary gift you had in mind, darling, I murmured, slipping the drive into my purse. The day unfolded according to my plan. Patricia reviewed my evidence with raised eyebrows and a low whistle. "You've done most of my job for me," she remarked, clearly impressed. "And with the infidelity clause in your prenup, plus these financial improprieties, Lily, you could take him for everything." "I don't want everything," I corrected her. "Just what's rightfully mine." By late afternoon, I'd moved certain assets to secure accounts, changed passwords to critical systems, and alerted our company's head of security, Jackson, who'd been with me since before Reynolds Enterprises existed, to expect unusual activity. Jackson had always been loyal to me first. He'd witnessed Harvey's gradual campaign to edge me out of decision-making over the years. "You sure about this timeline, Mrs. Reynolds?" Jackson asked during our discreet meeting in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the office. "Once it starts, I've been sure for longer than you know," I replied, passing him a sealed envelope with his instructions. "And after tonight, it's Ms. Carmichael again." My maiden name felt strange on my tongue after 2 decades, but also right, like reclaiming a part of myself that had been packed away. At 7:30 p.m., I entered La Ciel, the 5-star restaurant, where Harvey was supposedly working late on the Westbrook merger. The maitre d' recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Reynolds, we weren't expecting you. Your husband's in the private dining room." "It's a surprise," I said with a conspiratorial smile. "Our anniversary was yesterday." He led me through the dimly lit restaurant toward the back, where exclusive rooms offered privacy for wealthy patrons. I could hear Harvey's laugh before I saw him, that booming, confident sound that had once made me feel like the luckiest woman in the world. The maitre d' discreetly opened the door without announcing me, and there they were. Harvey and Peyton, intimately close in the candlelight, her hand covering his on the table, that bracelet glinting on her wrist. My anniversary bracelet. "Should I announce you, Mrs. Reynolds?" the maitre d' whispered. "No, need," I replied calmly. "I've seen enough." I slipped away unseen, my heart hammering not with pain, but with vindication. This final piece of evidence wasn't for the courts or the board of directors. It was for me. The confirmation I needed that I wasn't crazy, wasn't overreacting, wasn't throwing away 20 years on a suspicion. Back in our penthouse, I changed into the outfit I'd carefully selected. Not the devastated wife in sweats, but a sharply tailored, midnight blue suit that screamed confidence and control. I applied fresh makeup, styled my hair, and fitted the USB drive into a silver pendant that hung at my throat. Then I waited. Harvey stumbled in after midnight, loosening his tie with the slightly clumsy movements of a man who's had too much wine. "You're still up," he observed, surprise evident in his voice. "Everything okay?" "Actually, no," I said, my voice steady as I stood from the living room sofa. "Nothing is okay, Harvey, and I think you know why." He froze, his expression cycling rapidly through confusion, defense, and calculation. "Lily, if this is about yesterday, Peyton's bracelet, that was just a coincidence. I can explain. La Ciel has excellent lighting for their security cameras," I interrupted, watching realization dawn on his face. "But that's not really the point, is it? The bracelet, Peyton, even tonight's dinner, they're just symptoms of a much bigger problem." "Lily, please." "I'm not finished," I said, raising my hand. "For years I've watched you take credit for my work, marginalize my contributions to our company, and apparently divert our shared resources to fund your extracurricular activities. Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" His face darkened. "You're being dramatic. Whatever you think you know." "I don't think, Harvey." "I know." I unclasped the pendant and held up the USB drive. "Everything is here. Every text, every misappropriated dollar, Every time you undermined me with the board. Tomorrow at the executive dinner, everyone else will know too." He lunged for the drive, but I was ready for that. 20 years of marriage had made his moves predictable. I stepped aside easily, watching as he stumbled. "You wouldn't dare," he hissed, his charming facade completely gone now. "You'd destroy everything we've built." "No, Harvey. I'd be saving it." I moved toward the door, my overnight bag already waiting in the hallway. "Oh, and I've taken the liberty of moving into the Archer Hotel for the time being. I've also frozen our joint accounts and alerted the board to an emergency meeting after tomorrow's dinner. Sleep well." As I closed the door behind me, I heard something shatter against the wall, likely the crystal decanter he favored for his scotch. But I didn't flinch. The frightened, deceived wife was gone. In her place stood the architect of a plan years in the making, finally set in motion by a bracelet meant for me but given to another woman. Tomorrow would bring the final act, and I was more than ready. The executive dining room at Reynolds Enterprises buzzed with anticipation. Our quarterly leadership dinner was always a blend of celebration and strategy, but tonight carried a different energy. I'd arrived early, greeting the catering staff, and checking that the presentation equipment was functioning perfectly. Everything needed to work flawlessly. "Ms. Carmichael?" It was Jackson, our head of security, using my maiden name as instructed. "Everything's prepared as you requested. The board members have all confirmed their attendance, and the IT team has granted you override access to the main system." "Thank you, Jackson." I squeezed his arm gratefully. "You've been more loyal than I had any right to expect." He shook his head. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I've watched you build this company as much as Mr. Reynolds has. More in some ways." His validation shouldn't have mattered, but it did. For years, I'd been the invisible foundation upon which Harvey had built his empire. The world saw Reynolds Enterprises as his brainchild, his vision, his triumph over humble beginnings. Few remembered that when we started, it was my family connections that secured our first major client, my savings that kept us afloat during those precarious early months. "Lily." Early as always. Harvey's voice boomed across the room as he entered, with several board members. He'd recovered his composure since our confrontation last night, his suit impeccable, his smile firmly in place. To anyone else, he appeared to be the same charismatic leader who'd grown our company from a small tech consultancy to a global enterprise. But I could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. He approached, lowering his voice. "Whatever you're planning, reconsider. We can work this out privately." "Like you worked out the Richardson account?" I replied quietly. "Or Project Aurora?" A flash of panic crossed his face at the mention of Aurora, my most ambitious innovation proposal, one that Harvey had initially dismissed as impractical in board meetings. 6 months later, he'd presented a remarkably similar initiative as his own brainchild, claiming he'd refined my rough concept into something viable. The board had applauded his visionary leadership. I'd smiled and played the supportive wife. "That was business," he muttered. "Nothing personal." Funny, that's exactly how I feel about tonight. As the room filled with executives, board members, and key investors, I circulated with practiced ease. These were relationships I'd cultivated alongside Harvey for 20 years, though he'd increasingly pushed me to the periphery, introducing me as my wife Lily, rather than my co-founder and chief innovation officer. At precisely 7:30, Harvey clinked his glass for attention. "Before we dive into dinner, I'd like to share some exciting developments regarding Project Aurora. As you know, this initiative represents the future of Reynolds Enterprises, a complete reinvention of how we approach data analytics for our clients." I watched as he launched into a presentation, outlining the vision that had originally come to me 3 years ago during a conference in Singapore. I'd spent months developing the concept, creating prototypes, running simulations, all documented meticulously in files Harvey believed only he could access. "The potential market impact is unprecedented," he continued, gesturing enthusiastically at projection charts, We're looking at a conservative estimate of 40% revenue growth within 18 months. Impressive indeed, I said, standing up. All eyes turned to me. In fact, it's exactly the projection model I included in my original proposal 3 years ago. The one you said was too optimistic to present to the board. Murmurs rippled through the room. Harvey's smile faltered slightly. Lily helped brainstorm the early concepts, of course. Team effort, as always. Actually, I continued, moving to the presentation system and inserting my USB drive, I'd like to offer some additional context to that statement. Before Harvey could intervene, I'd accessed the system and switched to my own presentation. The screen displayed side-by-side comparisons. My original proposal documents with timestamps and electronic signatures next to Harvey's new vision presented 6 months later. As co-founder of this company, I said, my voice steady, I've always believed in giving credit where it's due. So let me clarify that Project Aurora wasn't a team effort that Harvey refined. It was my initiative, developed over 3 years, which Harvey initially rejected before repackaging it as his own. The room had grown deadly quiet. Harvey's face had turned an alarming shade of red. Lily, this is hardly the place. I disagree. This is exactly the place. I advanced to the next slide, showing email exchanges where Harvey had systematically undermined my authority with clients and partners. For years, I've watched as my contributions were minimized. My innovations attributed to others, primarily to my husband. Board member Eleanor Winters leaned forward. These are serious allegations, Lily. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything, Eleanor. I'm stating facts. I advanced to financial records highlighting discrepancies in project allocations and expense reports. Harvey has been systematically taking credit for my work, while simultaneously diverting company resources for personal use. The CFO, Martin Reeves, adjusted his glasses as he peered at the figures. These aren't the numbers that were presented at our last financial review. No, they aren't, I agreed, because Harvey has been maintaining 2 sets of records, one for the board and one for actual operations. Harvey finally found his voice. This is absurd. Lily's clearly having some kind of breakdown. Yesterday was our anniversary, and she's invented this conspiracy because you gave my anniversary bracelet to our marketing director, I finished for him. That was certainly illuminating, but it's hardly the foundation of what I'm presenting here. I advanced to the next slide, displaying evidence of how Harvey had gradually removed me from critical decision-making processes, often scheduling key meetings when I was traveling or otherwise unavailable. Then came the documentation of how he'd altered my original designs for Aurora, not to improve them, but to obscure their origin. The most damaging aspect isn't the personal betrayal, I continued, but how these actions have impacted our company. By prioritizing his ego over innovation, Harvey has delayed our market advantage by nearly 2 years. By diverting resources, he's compromised our financial stability in ways that haven't yet become apparent to the board. Director James Harrington, who'd been silently watching with increasing concern, finally spoke. If these allegations are accurate, this represents a serious breach of fiduciary duty. They're not allegations, I corrected gently. They're documented facts. And there's more. For the next 20 minutes, I methodically presented evidence of how Harvey had not only stolen my professional contributions, but had actively worked to diminish my role in the company we'd built together. I showed communications where he'd instructed team members to route projects around me, emails where he'd taken sole credit for joint achievements, and most damning of all, recordings of him discussing with trusted lieutenants how to eventually force me out entirely. I never planned to do this, I said, finally turning to face the stunned room. For years, I believed that supporting Harvey's public role as the face of Reynolds Enterprises was in the company's best interest. I told myself that the work mattered more than the credit. I glanced at Harvey, who sat frozen, his carefully constructed facade crumbling as his colleagues viewed him with new eyes. But I've come to understand that leadership built on deception ultimately fails. Harvey hasn't just betrayed me as his wife. He's betrayed this company, its mission, and every person in this room who trusted him to act with integrity." Eleanor Winters broke the heavy silence. "Harvey, what do you have to say to these accusations?" He stood, straightening his tie with trembling fingers. "This is clearly a personal vendetta. Lily discovered I've been involved with someone else, and she's retaliating by fabricating. The timestamps and electronic signatures on these documents aren't fabrications," Martin Reeves interrupted. "Nor are the financial discrepancies. Those warrant immediate investigation." "And the recorded conversations?" James Harrington added. "Those seem rather definitive." I watched as Harvey realized he was losing the room, losing the carefully constructed narrative he'd maintained for years. His eyes narrowed as he looked at me, no longer bothering to hide his contempt. "You've just destroyed 20 years of marriage and the company we built," he hissed. "I hope you're satisfied." "No, Harvey," I replied, maintaining my composure. "I've just saved them both from your destruction. The only difference is that Reynolds Enterprises can be salvaged. Our marriage can't." As board members huddled in urgent discussion and executives whispered among themselves, I gathered my materials and prepared to leave. I'd said what needed to be said. The evidence would speak for itself now. "Lily," Eleanor called as I reached the door. "The board will need to convene formally to address these matters. In the meantime," she looked around at her colleagues, who nodded in silent agreement. "In the meantime, we request that both you and Harvey recuse yourselves from operational decisions pending our investigation. However, given the nature and extent of the evidence you've presented, we're inclined to ask you to remain accessible as we evaluate next steps." I understood what she wasn't saying explicitly. They believed me, and Harvey's days at the helm were numbered. "Of course," I replied. "I'm available whenever you need me." As I walked out, leaving behind the chaos I'd unleashed, I felt neither triumph nor regret, only a strange, solemn relief. For the first time in years, I was walking in truth. And despite the uncertain path ahead, that made me stronger than I'd ever been while living in Harvey's shadow. The board meeting lasted until nearly midnight. I waited in my hotel suite, staring at the city lights below, the same view I'd once admired with Harvey when we signed the lease on our first real office. My phone finally rang. Eleanor Winters. "The board has made some preliminary decisions," she said without preamble. "We've suspended Harvey pending a full investigation and frozen his access to company systems and accounts." I exhaled slowly. "And the company?" "We need interim leadership," Eleanor continued. "Given your founder status and the evidence you've presented about your contributions, we'd like you to step in as acting CEO." The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, Harvey had worked to minimize my role, and now his actions had catapulted me into the position he'd guarded so jealously. "I'll need full authority to address the financial irregularities," I said, already mentally cataloging the steps needed to stabilize the company. "You'll have it." The board vote was unanimous. After hanging up, I called Patricia Winters, my divorce attorney. "It's time to execute the prenup's infidelity clause," I told her. The clause had been Harvey's idea 20 years ago. His family money needed protection, he'd claimed. I doubted he remembered that it worked both ways, or that I'd insisted on including professional misconduct provisions. "With pleasure," Patricia replied. "Between the evidence you've gathered and his suspension from the company, we're in an extremely advantageous position. The prenup gives you 51% of all marital assets, including his company shares. And his hidden accounts? Once proven to contain marital assets diverted without consent, they're subject to the same division, plus penalties." By morning, Harvey was served with divorce papers at the penthouse. Simultaneously, our corporate counsel delivered notification that his company equity was frozen pending resolution of the board's investigation into financial misconduct. I arrived at Reynolds Enterprises at precisely 8 a.m., entering through the main lobby rather than the executive entrance Harvey preferred. Employees watched with curious eyes as I made my way to the executive floor. The same employees who'd witnessed my gradual sidelining over the years. Jackson met me at the elevator. "Security protocols have been updated as requested, Ms. Carmichael. Mr. Reynolds' access has been revoked, and we've secured all sensitive areas." Harvey arrived an hour later, storming through the lobby despite security's attempts to stop him. I watched on the monitor as he was prevented from accessing the executive floor. "You can't do this." His voice carried through the phone when he finally called. "This company is mine." "Actually, it's ours," I corrected him. "Or it was. Until you decided to violate both our marriage and your fiduciary duties. The board can't. The board already has. And when they review the additional financial records I've provided, showing how you've been funneling company resources through shell corporations for your personal use, they'll do much more than suspend you." His silence told me he hadn't expected me to find those particular breadcrumbs. I'd spent months quietly tracking the money, following transfers through multiple accounts, documenting each irregularity. "You don't understand what you're doing," he finally said, his voice dangerously low. "I have connections you don't, people who will stand with me." "Perhaps," I acknowledged. "But they'll have to do it without access to company funds. I've already instructed the finance team to audit all accounts and expenditures for the past 3 years." By afternoon, our legal team had filed for emergency injunctions to prevent Harvey from contacting clients or employees. The finance department had identified over $12 million diverted through creative accounting to projects that never materialized, projects overseen exclusively by Harvey's most loyal lieutenants. As the market closed, our stock had dipped on rumors of leadership turmoil, but analysts were already responding positively to the announcement of my interim appointment. I'd spent years cultivating relationships with our investors, even as Harvey tried to exclude me from those conversations. Now those connections were proving invaluable. "The board made the right choice," commented one major investor during an emergency call. "We've always appreciated your strategic insight, Lily. Perhaps now we'll see it implemented properly." That evening, alone in my hotel suite with stacks of financial records and legal documents, I allowed myself a moment to feel the weight of what I'd done. I hadn't just reclaimed my professional standing, I'd blown up my entire life. 20 years of marriage, ended. The company we'd built together, in turmoil. Yet beneath the chaos lay opportunity, not just for me, but for Reynolds Enterprises, to become what it should have been all along, a company built on innovation rather than deception. My phone chimed with a text from Patricia. "Judge granted the emergency order. All assets frozen. He can't touch anything until the hearing." Another message followed from Eleanor. "Forensic accountants confirmed your findings. Board meeting tomorrow to discuss permanent leadership changes." I closed my eyes, feeling not triumph, but resolution. The legal and financial walls were closing in around Harvey, constructed from the very materials he'd used to try to constrain me. The irony was almost poetic. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But for tonight, I'd done enough. The press caught wind of the situation faster than I'd anticipated. By morning, business news headlines blared about trouble at Reynolds Enterprises and power struggle between co-founder spouses. Harvey had already given an interview positioning himself as the victim of a vengeful wife, a narrative I'd expected but still found breathtaking in its audacity. I dressed carefully for what would be my first public appearance as interim CEO, a charcoal gray suit that projected authority without trying too hard. The company's PR director, Samantha, met me in the lobby looking anxious. "There are reporters camped outside," she warned. "Mr. Reynolds' statement has generated significant interest." "I expected as much," I replied calmly. "What did he say?" She handed me her tablet, where Harvey's interview played. There he was, looking appropriately somber in our, now my, penthouse. "This is a painful personal matter that's been unfortunately dragged into the business arena," he was saying. "Yes, I made mistakes in my marriage, which I deeply regret. But Lily's claims about the company are simply not true. This is a retaliatory action driven by emotion, not facts. I handed back the tablet, unable to suppress a small, bitter laugh. Predictable. He's trying to frame this as an emotional woman lashing out over marital problems. How do you want to respond? Samantha asked. We don't, not directly. The board's official statement about leadership changes is sufficient for now. The facts will speak for themselves. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. As I walked into the boardroom, the tension was palpable. Several members looked uncomfortable, clearly disturbed by having their company's dirty laundry aired so publicly. We have a situation to address, Eleanor began once everyone was seated. The media coverage is already affecting investor confidence. Our stock dropped 8% at opening. That's temporary, I assured them, opening my laptop. Because permanent damage is allowing Harvey's narrative to stand unchallenged. I presented the detailed financial audit completed overnight, showing the extent of Harvey's misappropriations. Not just personal expenses disguised as business costs, but systematic diversion of resources from promising projects to ventures where he held undisclosed personal interests. This goes beyond marital infidelity, James Harrington observed, frowning at the figures. This is securities fraud. Which is why we need to act decisively, I replied. Not just to remove Harvey permanently, but to demonstrate to our shareholders and clients that Reynolds Enterprises stands for integrity. By unanimous vote, the board terminated Harvey as CEO and accepted my appointment to the position permanently. The company's attorneys were instructed to cooperate fully with the SEC investigation that would inevitably follow. As we adjourned, Eleanor held me back. There's still the matter of the Richardson client dinner tonight, with all this publicity. We proceed as planned, I said firmly. Canceling would signal weakness. Instead, we use this opportunity to reassure our key partners that the company is stable and moving forward. The Richardson dinner had been planned months ago, a celebration of our largest client renewing their contract. Dozens of business associates would attend, along with industry journalists invited to cover the partnership. Harvey had insisted on hosting it at La Ciel, ironically the same restaurant where I'd caught him with Peyton just days earlier. I arrived exactly on time, greeted warmly by Charles Richardson himself. Quite a week you're having, he commented, his eyes sharp with curiosity. Transformative would be the word, I replied smoothly. But Reynolds Enterprises' commitment to your business remains unwavering. The room filled quickly with executives, partners, and the carefully selected press. I could feel their scrutiny, their whispers. Most had seen me for years as Harvey's elegant accessory, rather than a business force in my own right. When dinner concluded, I stood to address the room. This wasn't part of the original agenda, but circumstances demanded it. Most of you have read the headlines, I began, so I'll address the elephant in the room directly. Yes, Reynolds Enterprises is experiencing leadership changes. Yes, those changes coincide with the end of my marriage to Harvey Reynolds. The room grew utterly silent. What the headlines don't tell you is that this company was built on a partnership, one that I've been part of from day one. While I've often worked behind the scenes, my fingerprints are on every major innovation we've brought to market. I gestured to Charles Richardson, including the integrated analytics platform that's transformed how Richardson Global manages their supply chain, the project that brings us together tonight. Charles nodded in confirmation, raising his glass slightly. Reynolds Enterprises isn't defined by one person, but by our collective commitment to innovation and integrity. That commitment remains unchanged. I paused, looking around the room at the faces watching me, some skeptical, some supportive, all attentive. Change is never comfortable, but sometimes it's necessary for growth. I look forward to leading this company into its next chapter, grounded in the values it was always meant to embody. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, but it was genuine. As I mingled afterward, several longtime business associates approached with newfound respect in their eyes. I always wondered why we saw less of you in recent years, one confided. Harvey always said you were focusing on family priorities. I smiled thinly. I assure you, my priorities have always included this company. By evening's end, the narrative had already begun shifting. Business reporters who'd arrived expecting to document a corporate scandal were instead writing about resilient leadership and company renewal. The stock price, which had fallen in the morning, stabilized as market confidence slowly returned. As I left La Ciel, a text message appeared from Harvey. You won't get away with this. I made you, and I can break you. I didn't respond. There was nothing more to say to a man who still didn't understand that his power had always been partially borrowed from me, and now I'd simply taken it back. 3 days after the Richardson dinner, I finally returned to the penthouse to collect my belongings. I'd arranged for Harvey to be away, a courtesy arranged through our respective attorneys rather than any lingering consideration for his feelings. The space felt both familiar and foreign as I walked through rooms filled with 20 years of shared history. Wedding photos still lined the hallway, capturing moments of genuine happiness that now seemed to belong to different people entirely. I removed them methodically, placing them in a box marked storage rather than trash. Despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to destroy those memories. Jackson accompanied me as security, standing discreetly in the background while I sorted through possessions. The movers will be here in an hour for the items you've marked, he reminded me gently. In the master bedroom, I opened the safe hidden behind Harvey's collection of vintage watches. Inside was a leather portfolio containing documents from our earliest business days. The original business plan for Reynolds Enterprises, written largely in my handwriting with Harvey's enthusiastic notes in the margins. I traced my fingers over the ambitious projections we'd made, the naive but passionate vision of 2 young entrepreneurs determined to build something meaningful. We really believed in it, you know, I said aloud, though Jackson was in the other room. Not just the business, but the partnership. The idea that we were better together than apart. The sound of the front door opening startled me. Harvey stood in the bedroom doorway, his expression unreadable. You weren't supposed to be here, I said, instinctively clutching the portfolio closer. It's still my home, he replied, his voice lacking its usual confidence. The days since his public downfall had taken a visible toll, his normally immaculate appearance somewhat disheveled, dark circles under his eyes. Jackson? I called, and he appeared instantly, positioning himself with professional restraint, but clear purpose. It's fine, Harvey said wearily. I'm not here to cause problems. He gestured vaguely at the half-empty closet, the boxes labeled with my name. I needed to see it, I guess, make it real. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us, 20 years of history collapsing into this awkward moment. Why did you do it, Harvey? I finally asked, the question that had haunted me through sleepless nights. Not just Peyton, but all of it, taking credit for my work, pushing me aside at the company. We built it together. He sank onto the edge of the bed we'd shared for 2 decades, suddenly looking older than his 52 years. I don't know if I can explain it in a way that would make sense to you. Try. He rubbed his face with both hands. At first, it was practical. Clients responded better to me in those early meetings. You remember how it was back then, how few women were taken seriously. It seemed strategic to have me as the face of the company. I nodded reluctantly. The tech world of the early 2000s had indeed been aggressively male-dominated. But then, he continued, it became the narrative. Everyone saw Reynolds Enterprises as my vision, my creation, and I started believing it myself. Each time I took a little more credit, it got easier to take more. Each time I made a decision without you, it got easier to exclude you. And the affairs, I pressed, needing to hear it all. He looked away. Power is intoxicating. The more I had, the more entitled I felt to everything I wanted. The raw honesty surprised me, but it came too late to change anything. The man I'd loved, the ambitious but principled partner who'd once valued my mind as much as my heart, had been consumed by his own ambition long ago. "I've filed the divorce papers," I said, my voice steady. "The terms reflect the prenup's infidelity clause, along with adjustments for the financial misconduct. Your attorney has the details." He nodded, resignation replacing the fight I'd expected. "And the company?" "The board's decision is final. You're welcome to challenge it legally, but given the evidence..." "I won't," he said, surprising me again. "I can't win, and I know it." As I finished gathering my essential belongings, Harvey remained seated on the bed, looking lost in the space that had once defined his success. When I reached the bedroom doorway, I paused. "For what it's worth, I didn't set out to destroy you, Harvey. I just refused to let you destroy me." He looked up, meeting my eyes one last time. "I know. That's what makes it worse." I left without looking back, closing the door on 20 years of marriage and stepping into an uncertain but undeniably liberating future. One where I would no longer be defined as Harvey Reynolds' wife, but as Lily Carmichael, CEO of the company I helped create. 6 months after that final conversation with Harvey, I stood before the newly designed logo illuminating the headquarters lobby. The sleek, angular letters of Aurora Analytics glowed with a subtle gradient from deep blue to vibrant purple, colors meant to evoke dawn, new beginnings, transformation. "What do you think?" asked Sarah, our rebranding consultant, watching me anxiously. "It's perfect," I replied, feeling the rightness of the name settle over me. Project Aurora, my innovation that Harvey had tried to claim, had become not just a product, but the company's new identity. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone, especially the employees who'd witnessed my reclamation of power. The transition hadn't been smooth. After Harvey's departure, we'd discovered more financial irregularities than initially apparent. Several key executives loyal to him had resigned, rather than adapt to new leadership. Clients had required reassurance, investors had demanded meetings, and competitors had attempted to capitalize on our momentary vulnerability. But we'd weathered it all. Today marked the official unveiling of our rebranding. Not just a name change, but a philosophical reset for the company. I checked my watch. "Is everything ready for the town hall?" Sarah nodded. "The global offices are all connected to the live stream. Employee gift packages have been distributed. Press packets went out an hour ago." In the main auditorium, every seat was filled. Faces I recognized from years of hallway passes looked at me with new appreciation. The months of transparent leadership had gradually erased the uncertainty that followed Harvey's departure. "Good morning, everyone," I began, surveying the room. "Today isn't just about a new name or logo. It's about acknowledging who we've always been at our core. Innovators, problem solvers, people who see possibilities where others see obstacles." I gestured toward the presentation screen behind me, where images of our earliest days as a company appeared, including photos of me and Harvey at our first office. Reynolds Enterprises began as a partnership. Over time, that founding vision became obscured. But the work many of you did, the innovations, the client solutions, the technological advances, those were real, regardless of whose name was on the door. The screen transitioned to our new branding materials. Aurora Analytics honors that legacy while embracing a new direction. The name comes from Project Aurora, which many of you worked on, a project that exemplifies our approach to data intelligence and client solutions. I walked across the stage, making eye contact with longtime employees. The aurora is a natural phenomenon that transforms darkness into light. It's a fitting metaphor for what we do with data, taking what's obscure and making it illuminating. But it's also a fitting metaphor for this company's journey. The audience nodded in understanding. Everyone knew the story now, how I'd reclaimed my rightful position, how the company had survived and was now thriving under new leadership. Our mission remains unchanged: to create intuitive, powerful analytic solutions that transform how our clients understand their world. But our methods have evolved. Transparency, collaboration, and recognition for innovation are now core values embedded in our structure. I outlined the organizational changes we'd implemented: flatter management hierarchies, clearer attribution for ideas, more diverse leadership representation. Changes that honored contributions rather than concentrating credit at the top, the Market has responded positively, I continued, displaying our rebounding stock price and new client acquisitions. But more importantly, our internal metrics show improved employee satisfaction and retention. As the presentation concluded and applause filled the room, I felt a sense of completion. The journey from overlooked co-founder to CEO had been painful, but necessary. Not just for me, but for everything we'd built. Later that evening, after press interviews and client calls, I stood at my office window watching the sunset paint the skyline in colors remarkably similar to our new logo. My assistant knocked gently. "Final contract revisions from the Henderson account," she said, placing a folder on my desk. "And these just arrived." She handed me an envelope containing divorce papers marked "Final Decree." Harvey's signature was at the bottom, releasing the last legal tie between us. I signed where indicated and returned them to the envelope, one chapter truly ending as another began. The timing seemed fitting. Closure on the day we launched our new identity. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. "Saw the rebrand announcement. Perfect name choice. The board couldn't be happier with the direction." I smiled, slipping the phone back into my pocket as I took one last look at the cityscape below. Aurora Analytics was no longer just a company name. It was a declaration of independence, a reclamation of credit long overdue, and most importantly, a promise to myself that I would never again stand in anyone's shadow. The light was changing. Outside, darkness giving way to the city's evening glow. Like an aurora, transformation was continuous, sometimes beautiful, sometimes challenging, but always illuminating the path forward.